Well, good afternoon, and I know it's already 1 o'clock, so I've got 30 seconds.
Take longer.
This site, as Myron mentioned, is very historic. This is the old F.W. Woolworth drugstore. In fact, the red awning at the rear of the building, if you look up at it, you can still see the traces of the letters F.W. Woolworth. Today is the 63rd anniversary. 53rd anniversary, rather. 53 years ago, on this day, February 1st, the first official student sit-ins were held in Greensboro, North Carolina. 3 weeks later, sit-ins were held here. This was in February of 1960. And the African-American students primarily who sat in at the lunch counter here, there was a lunch counter that ran along this wall right next to the railroad tracks, from this door all the way down to the other door. Most of those students were from Middleton High School, Blake High School, and Booker T. Washington Junior High School here in Tampa. Those sit-ins lasted for about a week. Some of the people who participated are still living here in Tampa. Clarence Ward was the youth organizer for the NAACP, and it was primarily the NAACP that led the sit-in. After that, there were some people who did get arrested, but there was very little violence here on Franklin Street. City fathers kind of decided they did not want to replicate what had been done in other cities where there was lots of violence. And so the merchants pretty much got together and agreed that they would desegregate the businesses. One of the last businesses on Franklin Street, however, to desegregate was the Tampa Theater. In fact, Mr. Tokley, who read the poem earlier today, or the poems, his wife, who was sitting on the side, I don't know if any of you know her, was my 10th grade biology teacher at Middleton High School. And I remember her being involved in the demonstrations where they were trying to desegregate the Tampa Theater, which finally happened in 1964. Franklin Street also is the home of Billy Graham. As a young man, a Bible student at Temple Terrace, I was called at that time the Bible Institute in Temple Terrace. As a young man, when he'd get out of his classes in the afternoon, he'd come down on Franklin and Fortune Street, which is about 3 blocks this way. And there is a marker there that says Billy Graham began here. That's where he started his street ministry. Before we had malls in the 1970s, this was Tampa's mall. This is where you came to do all your shopping. All the stores were here where you bought dresses and suits and shoes and everything else that you would need. And so as the malls began to open and the stores began to close in this area and move farther out, this became an area pretty much for people who were down on their luck, for homeless people, for alcoholics, and so forth. And as you all know now, downtown Franklin Street has been revived. Just 2 blocks in that direction was the first commercial radio station in the state of Florida, WDAE. Began broadcasting in 1922. Tampa Theater opened in 1926. One of the first public buildings in the whole state of Florida with air conditioning. So of course that made it a very popular place. You know how hot it gets here, especially during the summertime. Tampa Theater. Across the street, of course, is the Sam Gibbons Federal Courthouse. Sam Gibbons just passed last year. Some of you may be aware of that. He went to Congress in 1962. One of the things he was primarily responsible for was the Head Start program. And I know you've all heard of the Head Start program. You probably have people in your family who have children who've gone through Head Start at one time or the other. But the program dates back to 1965. Sam Gibbons was the one who sponsored the bill and got it through Congress. But the actual name, the term Head Start, was initiated by a Tampa man named Perry Harvey. We now have a park a few blocks from here named Perry Harvey Park. Perry Harvey in 1935 became head of the International Longshoremen Association, Local 1402, right here in Tampa. That was the year that unions were able to organize all over the country, 1935. Very dangerous job. His life was threatened. There were times when he would disappear for his own safety and the safety of his men. And so Perry Harvey and Sam Gibbons worked together to get the Head Start program. I'll just go back to the first stop where I met you at the Joe Chalura Park, designed in the year 2000 by Joe Chalura, former county commissioner, who also happened to be an architect. That gazebo that you were standing under when Mr. Tokley was reading his poetry, I don't know if you noticed, but when you speak up into the ceiling, it echoes. It has a tremendous echo. That gazebo was designed by Mr. J.A. Wood, who was also, this shouldn't surprise you, the architect of what is now the University of Tampa. At gazebo you were standing under. If you look at it, it looks a lot like the minarets over at the University of Tampa. That's because it was designed by the same man, Mr. J.A. Wood. At that time, it was a Tampa Bay hotel, which later became University of Tampa in the 1930s. So he designed the Tampa Bay Hotel, which opened in 1891. The next year, he designed the courthouse, which stood right in front of the police department. I think that's where he started, the light gas house. Okay, the building that now houses Tampa Police Department, that was called Courthouse Square. That was the location of the first four courthouses in Hillsborough County. Mr. Wood designed the very first one. When the 1952 courthouse was built on Pierce Street, which is now an annex, that gazebo was moved from right here on Franklin Street over to the location where it is now. And you also know that the City Hall, you didn't pass City Hall today, but you've all passed City Hall on Jackson and Florida. Dates back to 1915, built at a cost of $235,000. You notice the clock up in the tower, the chimes on the hour, 24 hours a day, that clock chime. That was called Hortense. In fact, I think they still call it Hortense. Hortense was the daughter of the jeweler who paid for the clock and donated the clock to the city of Tampa. His daughter's name was Hortense. The clock is called Hortense. That also was the site of the first police department and the first fire department. And the building that you passed, Fire Station number 1, built in 1911, it later relocated from City Hall to that spot. So that was the first separate firehouse building that we have in Tampa. We have that to the museum there.
We did it a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ashley Street, I wish we had time. One day if you decide to take my tour, and I'll be happy to give my card to anybody who's interested, we actually go to Oaklawn Cemetery and see where Mr. Ashley and his common-law slave wife are buried in the same grave.
We did that at home.
You do? Oh, that's right. Okay. So William Ashley was the first city clerk, 1853. He never married, but he took as his common-law wife his slave Nancy. And it was his wish that when they died that they be buried in the same grave. And they are buried in the same grave at Oaklawn Cemetery. So that's a whole nother story. Any questions on anything I've talked about? I can talk all day and you don't have all day. Any questions or comments about anything I've said up to this point? Okay, sure.